And you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive! Bit grey today, isn't it?
I'm here. He's queer. We're all over here. Hello. I mean, I thought I'd do some jazz hands, D. I'm drinking some coffee that isn't even Nescafe Gold. How are you doing today, sir?
Shocking. I'm doing all right.
And yeah, we'll just wait for the trucks to trickle in, as it were. Go on, get shunted by Lady of Shalott, a lot of you, by the tender engines in the chat. Okay, so we're gathered again for Andy Warhol. We'll just let Pia. I don't know what happens, D, but the number of people waiting always halves when we go live. I think they all have to refresh and then they come back in.
Yeah, I think it pops them out, or they have to watch an advert or something like that. Yeah.
Now, just before we get going, D, I'm going to have to do some shilling here. If you're going back to school, now is a very good time to pick up the Trivium or Foundations of Research or any of my courses, really, but especially those ones, because among other things, they'll help you come closer to the top of the class. Did I ever tell you, D, that I had the highest first for about 80 years in my university? And I reckon anybody taking my courses will at least, I mean, I can't guarantee anything, but they'll at least max out their natural potential. So let's just say let's just say your standard is like a 62 in an essay, and your max potential is like 68. I reckon I can max out that. I reckon I can max out whatever your natural talent is. I can't give you more natural talent, but I can max out whatever you've got there.
You too can absorb by osmosis the amazing intellectual skill that is the academic agent.
Yeah. Although I'm convinced that there are hard limits, like in Dungeons and Dragons, unless you're an 18 intelligence mage, you can't like memorize the spells every time, and I think I won't lie to people. I don't believe people are malleable. I think there is such a thing as natural talent as well. And I will say a number of people did tell me though that they did Foundations of Economics and completely aced all their economics exams and came top of their class and so on. And that's just because they get taught some economics, unlike what happens at the moment, which is like, yeah, so economics week 1, let's do some exchange. Week 2, green policy and the use of government regulation. It's like literally they do that in English now as well.
Everything is a proxy for
It's like week 1, how to analyze a poem. Week 2, feminist readings of fucking. There's no like, everybody just tries to run before they can even crawl around in the sand. Anyway, so yes, I think that'll be it for my shillings. I was just trying to buy time for more trucks to come in. So this is the 4th week we're spending on Andy Warhol, D, and your plans are ambitious. You want to take us all the way to the 80s today?
No, we're getting to the end of the 70s today. That's what we're getting.
All right.
The 80s is the final installment, part 5. So,
yes. Okay. So, I will. So we're looking here at the Velvet Underground.
Yeah.
And there's Lee Reed in the front, John Cale on the right. What's her name? Mo
Tucker. Yeah.
Mo Tucker. I forget the name of the chap on the left.
Sterling Morrison.
Sterling Morrison, that's it. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's very rare for a group. All 4 members super talented, and presumably that's Nico in the middle, right?
And Nico, yeah.
I should mention
who was never really a member of the group. I mean, she was begrudgingly sort of brought along.
She just hung around with them, basically. Totty.
Yes.
She was Totty for the Velvet Underground.
She was certainly Totty for the Velvet Underground. But I mean, a very important part of, I mean, I think both their image early on and the sound, you know, I mean, she did have a very distinct vocalization, let's just say.
Yeah. People talk about the University of Life in the corner. No. You'll never come top of the class relying on the University of Life, son. You need actual academic skills. That's one of the biggest copes I ever see. I went to the University of Life, man and boy. Yeah, but can you write a sentence?
Yeah.
And anyway,
can you define marginal utility?
Now, one of the things I was going to say about Nico is that even though she was, as we're saying, Totty, her actual music was quite. In some ways, she was like even more avant-garde than the Velvet Underground. Her actual music.
She was quite esoteric. You know, she was I sort of like part, you know, kind of like medieval throwback, part folk, part kind of you know, sort of futuristic. I mean, she was famously described as Greta Garbo, was an IBM computer with a Greta Garbo accent. Yes, and her music after her stint with the Velvet Underground is quite interesting.
It may interest you, Dee, that I've been scouring Velvet Underground records this week because on AA Radio, my theme is Sunshine, right? And I've got the cheesiest possible Sunshine pop records, but I then want to contrast them with the dark, like I want to do a darkness and light thing. So I'm going to play one cheesy record and one like dark record, and I quite like the idea of playing Venus and Furs or something like that, because they're let's just say they focused on the underbelly, the dark side of life, the wild side, you might say. So why are they here? Why are we looking at Velvet Underground?
So just to rehash, I mean, obviously you know if you haven't seen the other parts of this series, you should watch them. But you know, this is the you know, sort of mid 1960s at this point, and a scene has sort of grown up around Warhol and his studio, which was called the Factory, which was basically a huge industrial loft in Midtown Manhattan, where he did his work, you know, his artwork, but also it was just a whole kind of, I would say, a sort of social scene. And it was part avant-garde, part kind of bringing sort of curious society people, art collectors, and, you know, sort of starstruck kids, low-life drug addicts. I mean, it was a very strange mixture of people. And, you know, people would basically kind of come there to hang out and be seen. And there were lots of sort of parties and events and happenings there. So, you know, it was a very strange sort of moment of this kind of cross-pollination between, you know, the strata of people who were establishing Warhol's, you know, kind of career as an artist, and also, you know, this other kind of burgeoning scene that was happening in the 1960s. You know,
all tomorrow's parties, you might say.
Yes, all tomorrow's parties, and so it was very curious. I mean, and also what's sort of strange about it is, you know, people have this sort of culturally kind of pushed notion of the 1960s as being basically owned by sort of hippies and that sort of thing. But that was actually the kind of complete opposite of this scene. I mean, if anything, there has always been with Warhol and his sort of the people around him, an almost, I would say, reactionary bend, and we'll see this as we look at kind of various events and things that happen around that scene. But it was it was a whole other facet of the 1960s. So if you're just aware of this kind of narrative of the 60s being about sort of peace and love, I mean there's a very different thing going on here.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I was just saying, I've been looking to contrast some of this sunshine pop. I was looking at it. I think it's very interesting that in order to do that, I'm having to go to New York. I mean, is it as simple as saying like New York versus California with a lot of these things?
Yes, I mean there's a lot of that, and actually I have a little anecdote that we'll get into in a few minutes here, which really starkly shows the kind of contrast between the kind of New York scene and what was going on in California, quite hilariously. So the other person I want to mention is there's a chap called Paul Morrissey, who became, I would say, at this period, started to become the kind of, Warhol, you have to understand, was both active as the kind of, he was sort of like the eye of the hurricane. He was the sort of center of everything, and yet he was also very passive in his character. So, I mean, he certainly has a reputation, and had a reputation amongst people, people who knew him only casually, as someone who basically didn't talk much. He just was sort of there, and the scene kind of swirled around him. But he wasn't really, actively like a participant. There's very much this character of Warhol as the kind of observer. As the eye. Sort of like the eye of Sauron, watching everything and directing everything through the force of his will, but yet not actually sort of physically active in the scene.
Now that somewhat interests me. As let's just say someone who has has done a bit of community building in his time, in a strange way. But Warhol's not exactly like the life of the party in his personality, from what we've seen. How do you think he was able to assemble this kind of hip and happening thing around him, while being the way he was? Like, how do you see that?
Well, what he did, I mean, what he was very good at doing, in various aspects of his career, was basically sort of befriending people who made up the lacking parts of his personality and his character. I mean, he would surround himself with people who had all the qualities that he lacked. I mean, this sort of gregariousness, this sort of adventurousness, connected to different scenes. I mean, he tended to like to be around young people. I mean, you have to realize he was by this point, he was 40. He was born in 1928. So he was quite a bit older than a lot of the people in the scene. And throughout his life, he always tended to like to be around kind of younger people, because I think, again, because he didn't really have a youth. I mean, he had spent most of his youth working very, very hard. I mean, basically all of the 1950s, he spent, just working on his career as a commercial artist and sort of rising to the top of that.
I can see my buddy off here is saying in the chat, simple, it's just fame that has done this for him. But it was it necessarily that? Because we've been tracking this, and as far as I understand from we're currently in our kind of loose chronology here, and it's still in the mid 60s. My understanding is that Andy Warhol is kind of world famous, this is Andy Warhol type thing. Wasn't quite like, he's still kind of like I wouldn't say a jobbing artist, but he's still like literally making art like a factory and selling it for a couple of $100. So like, is it really quote unquote fame, or is it something else? I wonder.
Well, as I've said with many things, is that a lot of these concepts that we take for granted didn't exist before this period. I mean, in a way, he kind of invented this idea of the kind of this quote superstar. In fact, that word superstar as far as anyone knows, came out of Warhol's scene, and was used sort of first to describe the kind of people involved in his entourage. So he cultivated this sort of notion of almost kind of being famous for being famous, fame as a kind of self-perpetuating state.
And if he wasn't that, certainly, what's her name? Taxi, I forget her name again.
Edie Sedgwick.
I mean, she literally was famous just for being famous.
Yeah.
And was kind of one of his creations. One of the things that strikes me when we're talking about this is that if you ever read any of the literature on like how to be an entrepreneur, I always remember this from when I was growing up. My mother was into this NLP stuff. I read a lot of the neuro-linguistic programming. She was trained by a chap called Richard Bandler, who's a bit of a kind of dark, manipulative character. But as part of that, she had all these like books by Tony Robbins, right? And I mean, I always struggle with the sheer amount of American schmaltz in these things, But one of the things that I remember from all of that kind of American kind of awaken the giant within type material is that most successful entrepreneurs surround themselves with talented people, and often it's not necessarily the talent. I'm not saying Andy Warhol wasn't talented. I'm just saying in a lot of this literature, it's about being able to put the pieces together and see the opportunity. And I find that kind of interesting that Warhol always saw what he was doing as a business, and whether he knew or not, he was also acting as almost like the perfect entrepreneur in being able to do this sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, he was, and very much his role was as sort of like a CEO. I mean, he was the face of the organization, but he of course had to delegate a lot of things that he couldn't do. I mean, whether he couldn't do them, just because he was too busy and involved with other aspects of it, but also, as I said, things that he lacked in his personal character. I mean, he wasn't handsome. He wasn't kind of gregarious in a kind of certain way that we expect. He wasn't really quick-witted. I mean, he was a quite shy, strange sort of character, and so he sort of he sort of gravitated towards and kind of picked up, and some would say manipulated or used people to kind of draw out these aspects which he needed to create this scene. Also, I think it's important not to forget that all the motivations of human beings that have ever kind of pushed people to do things were at play here. So people weren't just coming there for him, all this, this scene, but they were also coming there for the promise of basically sex. They're hooking up. They were young men looking for young girls, young women. There were young men looking for young men. There were people who, of course, thought that this was a way to that was their ticket to stardom. So people just hung around because they knew that there would be important people there watching the scene, and they thought it was a way to be discovered for whatever their talent was. They could be a model, they could be a singer, they could be an actor, whatever. I mean, so people were also involved in the scene for their own kind of motivations. People came there for drugs. People came there, because, they needed this sort of shot of danger and glamour in their lives. So
one of the things, there was a chap at the event, and if he's watching, by the way, I'll reply to your email. I'm people don't seem to understand. I see thousands of messages every day. It's very difficult for me to reply to everything, but I will reply soon. But he was a chap who had run like a number of nightclubs in London in the 80s and 90s, and he was explaining that the scene there is always like this weird mix of almost like. It's like a mix of he was saying that you can find people who are literally like almost down and out destitute, rubbing shoulders with like, a Rothschild or something.
Yes.
And I'm imagining that this kind of scene here, you'd call it the underground, wouldn't you? It'd be like there would be people who were almost in like a desperate situation, and also world famous or incredibly rich people and oligarchs all rubbing shoulders in these same spaces. Kind of
yes, I mean,
high and low thing going on.
Yeah, and absolutely, it was a mixture of high and low, and of course the high came to kind of slum it, and kind of watch the antics of these people that of course they would have no access to in their life. I mean, I mentioned Jane Holzer, baby Jane Holzer, who was basically a socialite and a wife of a rich man, who by her own admission came down to the factory in order to just make her, to inject some sort of glamour into, and sort of excitement into her life, and as I said, you get these sort of like crazed amphetamine queens, and then you get like Judy Garland or Tennessee Williams or the Rolling Stones, or Pauline de Rothschild. I mean, you get this very strange mixture of people.
Tennessee Williams, now he's like a character from a different world almost.
Yeah,
I mean, quite literally. While we're talking about this, by the way, I always remember reading some years ago that in Russia, where they have the oligarchs, the very very rich and the kids of the kind of billionaire, multi-billionaires, they were doing this thing called like homeless tourism, or like where they literally kind of LARP as people who were homeless or living on the streets or whatever for some kicks.
Yeah,
it's kind of
it's like the trust. Yeah, it's like the Trustafarian phenomenon, or it's like Marie Antoinette and her ladies like playing milkmaids at the Tuileries. I mean, it's that has been a component of society for a very long time.
I know James the Sixth of Scotland, also James the First of England. His father used to do this. He used to disguise himself as a commoner and go and like walk amongst the normal people, and even have like sex with common women and things like that. He was well known for it, which is that. I mean, I don't know if you know that scene in Henry V where Henry V disguises himself as a normal guy, and there's like, oh, what do you think about the king then? Good guy. But apparently this was a well-known technique up in Scotland where the kings did that. So I guess it's a long old tradition of this high and low business. Yes.
Now, of course, something that you have to remember is that this, we've touched on this idea a few times during these streams, but everything was much smaller back then. I mean, the world was a much smaller place. We just have this idea of the way things are today, this absolutely mass society, and these, this sort of absurd kind of, everything is absurdly kind of mediated and covered and such. But I mean, this was the kind of birth of that kind of mass culture during this period of history. So, I mean, it was a time where, as we said with Warhol, I mean, you could just pick up your life and go to New York and struggle. I mean, these things are just kind of unheard of now, because of course everything is now so massively expensive and so massively kind of developed. But this was a period where you could kind of do that. There was still this kind of fluidity in society that would allow you to do that. But part of that also, and unfortunately, which would have tragic consequences for Warhol, is that it was also, I don't think people realize that, of course, there's something inherently dangerous about this. When you have a situation where there's an open door and any sort of person can come in and mingle with any other kind of person, where you get the mix of the high and low, you also, and when you sort of favor people who are kind of eccentric and strange and avant-garde, you're also going to eventually get people who are more than strange and more than eccentric, and they're going to be dangerous people.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of an example of what might make this real, and this is going to sound very strange, D, but we've been joking, like Saffron wrote to bloody Mencius Moldbug and he wrote back and everybody had a bit of a laugh. Like, it strikes me that in this era, the Saffron of that time would have literally just jumped in the car and gone and seen him, type thing. Wherever he, like, I can only imagine what sort of weird parties Yarvin goes to, and you can see the inherent like, I would, if I found out that Saffron did that, my immediate thought would be like, yeah, it's a dodgy situation. But like, people used to do that sort of thing, or like, there is an edge to that, isn't there? It's like there's a vulnerability and a risk to it all. Yeah.
And like, and again, I think you see this not just in Warhol scene, but in the 60s in general, is that this sort of openness and kind of commingling of kind of ideas and cultures and people very quickly turned ugly. And I think if you look at what happened in the later 1960s, you will see this sort of darkness and violence that creeps into what was a kind of, a great opportunity became something else. And partially, of course, it was drugs. And as I said, this was a period where every strata of society was beginning to be completely infiltrated with drugs of one sort or the other, whether it was, amphetamine that you bought on the street, or if it was, amphetamine that your society doctor prescribed you, as mother's little helper. And I think as that reached a critical mass, as the kind of permissiveness of society became larger and larger and larger, of course, the kind of dark side of that is going to creep in, and it did very quickly. And if you look at any scene in the 1960s, not just the Warhol scene, I mean, you see that you see what happened. Like take for the Beatles, for instance. I mean, you see where this candy-colored world eventually led. It led to serious heroin addictions and abusive situations, and the dissolution of those bonds of friendship, and and that happened all over the place.
There's a guy in the chat saying it was a higher trust society. I can't help but be reminded of that book, The Fourth Turning, that me and Charlie read a while back. Was Steve Bannon's favorite book. Because what they talk about in there is that the GIs, the great, the guys coming home from the war, basically built an incredibly safe world. And the kid, like these people who grew up in that world, never knew anything else. So they had almost a childlike naivety about them, if that makes any sense. And in some ways, you can see the 60s as almost like a parable, like like Pinocchio. Pinocchio is just like an innocent, wide-eyed idiot, basically, and he ends up in Pleasure Island, and it's corrupting, and it's dangerous, and it's dark, and there are really evil people out there. And this seems to me to have something of that of it, where it's like the dark nature of man kind of reasserts itself in a strange way, and they start to realize the world, that this safe world that their parents have built is it's actually kind of an illusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's and of course it becomes a fallen world very quickly. And I mean, New York City, for instance, went from in basically 10 years, went from, I would say it's kind of productive and modern and efficient kind of late 50s pinnacle to the beginnings of the horror that we saw in that episode of The Ashes, which was just, 10 years after all this. So, the degradation was very quick. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, not to be, but we've been going for 30 minutes, and we
must pick up the pace, if we're going to move.
Yeah, I mean, there's 222 images. So, but anyway, so just one thing I want to hit on quick is, so I said Warhol was sort of like delegated the kind of the direction of the scene to various people, and so in this period there was the kind of rise to prominence amongst the Warhol people of a chap called Paul Morrissey, who was a young filmmaker interested in filmmaking, and also the most, I would say, far right-wing crank that you could you could possibly imagine. I mean, if you go and read any sort of material about Paul Morrissey, I mean, he was a kind of extraordinary character, and the kind of person that I think people looking, sort of looking at this scene and not really knowing much about how things work would just assume that these people being, the Warhol being an artist and this being a kind of New York art thing, that they were the same kind of, sort of transnational shit libs that occupy that milieu, today. But they weren't. As I said, it was the very beginning of this idea of the kind of artist, the media artist having a scene around him, and so it really was a kind of strange mix of people. And so Paul Morrissey, I think, he started to become the kind of primary influence on what Warhol and his crowd did, and so the situation at the factory became less involved with the making of art, kind of gallery objects, and more involved with the filmmaking, the kind of creating a scene and packaging it as a product. I mean, you must also remember that, as you said, Warhol was always oriented towards a business, and how do we make money? How do we sort of turn this into a self-sustaining kind of money-making scene? And I think Paul Morrissey really kind of was the personality who pushed this aspect of the scene at the time. So again, they were almost, with Paul and Warhol and various other people there, trying to turn this social scene that had grown up around the factory into something that you could actually make money with. And you mentioned that person being a kind of nightclub promoter. Well, I mean, nightclubs were a very different place in the mid 1960s. I mean, it was still very much a kind of holdover from the kind of 1930s or 40s idea of the Cotton Club, or the kind of sophisticated sort of cocktail driven.
I imagine people like Frank Sinatra and actual mafia members hanging out in them.
Yeah, and so this, and partially because of Warhol, and as we'll see, the Velvet Underground and things that they did with that aspect of the scene, they kind of created this idea of the kind of the nightclub or the nightlife as sort of multimedia spectacular, So, and of course, the Velvet Underground, I mean, they'd started to come around Warhol's studio, and so the immediate idea was, well, what do we do with them, and how do we show them off? How do we use this strange, chaotic group of musicians, in a way that again can be a business? So, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to mention very quickly on the Velvet Underground themselves, because they were a very influential group. Incidentally, I've just been looking at this picture, and I think it's just me, or is John Cale easily the coolest of these three? If you're a woman and you were like, you can have Lou Reed, Sterling here, or Cale. I reckon Cale is the coolest looking of the three of them. But the old line about the Velvet Underground was that they didn't sell many records, but everybody who bought one started a band. That was the kind of I like to think that this channel's a bit like that. I'm the Velvet Underground of the political right wing. And I don't have the most subscribers, but anyone who does watch starts a YouTube channel,
that was very much in the kind of Warhol ethos that basically that you could do it yourself, that you could just okay, I'm a commercial artist, I want to become a famous fine artist, so I can just do that. I can create that. We have this group of very, very caustic musicians producing, very strange and loud and jarring and dark and disturbing music, which was very different from the sort of things that, were kind of popular at the time. Well, you could just turn them into a group, into a famous musical group. You want to make films. Well, why not just like get a 16mm camera, and we'll just make films. Where they may not be good films. They may not be, they may not be successful. But this sort of, so it's a very American sort of notion that you could just sort of pick up and do it yourself.
If you haven't listened to the Velvet Underground and you're watching this, I think one of the things that kind of sets them apart from any other groups is John Cale's electric violin, which is pretty jarring when you first listen to it. I can't think of many other groups that had an electric violin on them around this time. So certainly on Velvet Underground and Nico, that instrument stands out to me. But let's carry on, D. 200 images.
Okay. Yeah, go on. Lou and Andy. Oh, speaking of Tennessee Williams, they're actually sitting in front of a transparency, one of those acetates of a picture of Warhol and Tennessee Williams in the center, and the film producer Lester Persky on the right.
People you just never expect to meet each other. I mean, I might do a stream. I could do a stream on Tennessee Williams one day because he talk about interesting gay view of straight life, as we were talking before we came on air. There's Lou Reed. Hey, he is pretty cool, to be fair to him.
Yeah,
you would have thought he was cool if you were a teenager or 20-something in that time.
Yeah. I like this picture because it's just so incongruous, Warhol and
this is something else as well. I say still exists. It existed about 10 years ago in the trendier parts of London, which is this strange mix of like, how can I say, like hipsters and just like old school like canteen. Just kind of, this sort of thing. I always found that like really weird, but it's still, if you go to certain parts of Camden and some of those other places, you still get that. Well, I say still, I don't know if they survived lockdown, but a few years ago you'd have still found this in some areas. I wonder what they talked with her about. They would have made conversation. I find those kind of contact fascinating.
And of course, I mean, again, this is something that disappeared. As everything became bigger and bigger, and everything became more expensive, and everything became, I would say, the transition from the kind of, youthful cross-pollination of these types of worlds to a kind of postmodern condition where everything is a kind of craft, organic, sandwich shop. This kind of situation, I think, sort of faded away. But it was certainly, this was the period where, the avant-garde scene was very small. It was a very, very small clique of people, and so of course most of their kind of experiences were kind of running into the normal world and interfacing with the normal world at this point. Okay.
John Cale was cooler. Yeah. Look at that cop.
There's the police coming in, turning the Velvets, turning the.
Now, why is it that without knowing anything else, I know that guy's Italian? He must be Italian. That guy, surely.
Well, he's a New York cop in the 1960s. Of course, he's either Irish or Italian. There's not that many options.
He's got Italian features. There we go.
Okay, so pause here. So again, so what do you do with this? So you've got a rock group, and you've got an artist who makes these kind of wallpapery films, that are better as sort of ambiance than a sort of something you would watch and pay attention to. You've got all these colorful characters. Well, you have to kind of create a scene for them. And so basically through Paul Morrissey, Warhol rented out a kind of, I would say, I can't remember. It was sort of a social club. I mean, this place had been a social club for a Polish social club, and the space had become sort of vacant. It was located on what's called St. Mark's Place in New York, 8th Street in the East Village, which, of course, at that time was not, it wasn't the kind of punk rock kind of hip and cool, place that it became. It was still very much kind of a sort of grubby ethnic neighborhood, sort of Eastern European neighborhood. And so there was this hall. I think it was called Polski Dom Narodny. My Polish, of course, is non-existent, so I don't know how that would be pronounced. But anyway, this sort of hall became vacant, and so Warhol and Paul Morrissey and the Velvets, they basically rented this space, and they put on these shows called, I mean, you hear it says Erupting Plastic Inevitable. Eventually it became called the Exploding Plastic Inevitable, and it was basically kind of a proto nightclub of the type that people would understand today, and so it was the Velvets playing their loud, chaotic music. It was various members of the Warhol milieu wearing, leather outfits and Carnaby Street kind of clothes, dancing with whips, and it was sort of mod kind of 60s it girls, dancing on platforms. Warhol's films were projected, kind of on the walls. They were projected over top of the Velvets. There was lighting effects. The mirror ball, which people associate with kind of disco, was actually a 1920s, 1930s thing, and that was sort of brought back also. So it was a kind of multimedia event, and it was the beginnings of what we would understand as a kind of what turned into the kind of nightclub. And it was a happening, and people would come and dance and hang out, and they created a scene, and there was a charge at you paid at the door, and so they again created this sort of product out of what had been a kind of social scene. They sort of packaged it and turned the kind of atmosphere of the factory into something that you could go and pay and be a part of. You want to go to the next one? So there it is. That's the what's called the Dom, where this took place, and it was very popular.
Imagine the big lines outside. Yeah. Here we go. The whip.
Yep.
Whip.
Gerard Malanga, who was Warhol's painting assistant, sort of famous for doing the what he called the whip dance, and again, the bright colors, the films projected over everything. It was a happening. I just want to read a little passage from, which I think is just absolutely hilarious, which gives a little sense of the kind of this idea of the clash of worlds. This is from Warhol's book Popism, which was his sort of memoir of the 1960s. I was invited to speak at the annual banquet of the New York Society for Clinical Psychiatry by the doctor who was the chairman of the event. I mean, just pause for a minute and just think about that. Andy Warhol was invited to speak at the New York Society for Clinical Psychiatry.
Should worry everybody.
Yes. I told him that I'd be glad to, quote, speak if I could do it through movies, that I'd show some of my films, and he said that would be fine. Then when I met the Velvets, I decided that I wanted to, quote, speak with them instead, and he said that was fine too. So one evening in the middle of January, everybody at the factory went over to the Delmonico Hotel where the banquet was taking place. We got there just as it was starting. There were about 300 psychiatrists and their mates and dates, and all they'd been told was that they were going to see movies after dinner. The second the main course was served, the Velvets started to blast and Nico started to wail. Gerard and Edie Sedgwick jumped up on the stage and started dancing, and the doors flew open, and Jonas Mekas and Barbara Rubin, who was a sort of avant-garde filmmaker, with her crew of people with cameras and bright lights, came storming into the room and rushing over to all the psychiatrists and pushing cameras in their faces and asking them things like, is his penis big enough? What does her vagina feel like? Do you eat her out? Why are you getting embarrassed? You're a psychiatrist. You're not supposed to be getting embarrassed. Edie had come with Bobby Newworth. While the camera crews filmed and Nico sang her Dylan song, Gerard noticed that Edie was trying to sing too, but that even in the incredible din, it was obvious that Edie didn't have a voice. He always looked back on that night as the last time she ever went out with us in public, except for a party here and there. His thought was that she felt she'd been upstaged that night, and she realized that Nico was the new girl in town. So this is sort of an interesting moment.
Jealousy.
Yeah, because Warhol basically was also presenting this moment as the kind of changing of the guard. And as I said, there is a kind of ruthlessness and coldness to the way that Warhol seemingly could drop people that he'd been very close to at a moment's notice and not care about them anymore. And this was certainly basically what happened with Edie Sedgwick. You know,
I like that quality of Warhol's. I can relate to that very well.
Of course you do. the worst part of his character, yes. But you know, I mean, yes, and that is certainly what he did, and I think many people are actually, one of the main resentments that a lot of people had, including Bob Dylan, as we mentioned, was this idea that he had basically used Edie up and dropped her and basically allowed her to burn up. And famously, I said on one of the past streams, you know, someone was talking about Edie being suicidal, and Warhol was reported to have said that, oh, well, if she does decide to kill herself, make sure you let me know so I can film it.
Oh, still brutal.
Yeah. So
I like it.
God's sake.
Yes, but there's a kind of poetic justice to it all. It's kind of like, yeah, you know, you make a deal with the devil, but you know, devil's going to drop you when the time comes. You know, so let's carry on. So basically, Nico became the new. From that moment, you're saying that within Warhol circle, Nico was the it girl, and Edie was on the outs.
Yeah, I mean, Nico and the Velvet Underground. I mean, there was a very clear kind of passing of the guard from the kind of world that had grown up, the kind of carefree days of the factory that was sort of centered on making art objects, to the Paul Morrissey era, which was centered on the making of films and the promotion of the Velvet Underground. And, you know, it went from kind of centered on fine arts to centered on media in a very different way.
See, there's something about that ruthless brutality of, like, I mean, I guess you say show business is like it, but I've talked a lot about Vince McMahon, and he's someone else. Like, one day you're headlining WrestleMania, next day you're right at the bottom of the card, next day you're fired. Basically, you're fucking out. That's it. You're done. I kind of like, if he's treating it like a business, surely you have to be like that, because, you know, if you're not hot anymore, what's the point? Like, what's the point of running with a burnt out EG? Like, he's not a psychologist, is he? He's not a therapist. So I'm not trying to defend him. I'm just saying in a strange way you can see it from a like you have to run with what's hot if you're in the line of work that he's in, don't you? Isn't all show business like it? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I mean, again, you have to realize that at this point, it wasn't exactly show business. I mean, it was a sort of simulation of show business. It was like this weird kind of alternate, sort of makeshift Hollywood, viewed through a very distorted lens. I mean, we call these people superstars, but they most of them couldn't act, they couldn't sing, they looked the part, and that was sort of enough, so it was, they weren't making huge amounts of money out of any of this yet.
So there we go. I just noticed there's a hand. Is that a hand? What's that hanging on the left? On that image there, is that a hand, just a towel or something? I thought it was a hand hanging there for a second.
Yeah, no, it's just something in the periphery there. Anyway,
more Nico.
There's Nico. Oh.
More velvets.
They are doing this whole scene.
Is that doesn't look like Nico? Is that Nico there?
Yeah, that's Nico. That's her.
Strange.
The chap in the front is Gerard Malanga, who had been Warhol's painting assistant and now became, the sort of the kind of go-go boy for the group.
I'll stick you in there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I suppose it's just his stance again. I guess she's standing a bit like Meghan Markle. Pussy on, as it were. Let's carry on. Okay. Interesting film, like camera. It's obviously a particular type of camera that's being used for the shot.
Yeah, I mean, very, very grainy 35mm. Again, shot in the low light, so it's going to lack a lot of detail.
Nico singing to the sound of the Velvet Underground. Look at these layers. Andy Warhol presents Nico singing to the sounds of the Velvet Underground. Okay. It's a lot to get in. A lot to get your head around in one little... okay. At the Underground, at the new Mod Dom. And there's the famous front cover.
Yeah, so as I think we mentioned on the last stream, Warhol produced the Velvet Underground's first record, which is called The Velvet Underground Nico, and did the cover for it, which was consisted of a banana with a sort of piece of the yellow part of the banana printed on a piece of vinyl, which was stuck to the record, to the front of the record jacket, which you could then peel off and go to the next image.
I have very fond memories. I had to go all the way to Cardiff to pick up my copy of the Velvet Underground and Nico. I obviously had read all about it in the magazines, and they didn't stock it in my little Woolworths, so I had to go trawling through the stores in Cardiff to find my copy. I thought I was so cool, but it was 1987.
Yeah. So here's a quote from Lou Reed. Quote, "He just made it possible for us to be ourselves and go right ahead with it because he was Andy Warhol. In a sense, he really did produce it, this record, because he was this umbrella that absorbed all the attacks when we weren't large enough to be attacked. As a consequence of him being the producer, we just walk in and set up and do what we always did, and no one would stop it because Andy was the producer. Of course, he didn't know anything about record production, but he didn't have to. He just sat there and said, 'Oh, that's fantastic.' And the engineer would say, 'Oh, yeah, right, it's fantastic, right.'" So he
gave him the space. He
gave him the space, and he paid for it. I mean, most importantly, he paid for the recording sessions. So I like this sort of postmodern idea of the producer as someone who produces by not producing. I mean, literally, his greatest production decision was to just pay for it and then not do anything and let them deal with it. Now, of course, it did have a real producer. We talked about it on the stream last week, who was also the same producer who worked with Bob Dylan at this time, doing and many other artists.
I should say, by the way, Legacy of Warhol lives on tomorrow at 8 p.m. Women's Hour.
Oh,
that's me doing my. I just gave him the space.
All
paid
right.
for it.
All right,
carry on.
Okay. Go next.
Yeah. Next image. Yeah.
And that's the inside of the record. All right. Okay, so I want to get back to the art a bit, because even though the kind of production of paintings and sculptures and such had sort of declined a bit during this period, they were, of course, Warhol was still sort of producing fine art, and one of the ways that Warhol made money throughout his career. And not just Warhol, but this is something that artists have been doing for hundreds of years, is to produce prints. Now, I want to explain what this means. So, whether it's Rembrandt or William Hogarth or Pablo Picasso or Andy Warhol, they will have their kind of high-end work, which is the paintings, paintings on canvas, sculptures that they'd made personally. I mean, even in Warhol's case, where this line between, handmade and, and kind of mechanical was blurred, there was still a kind of hierarchy. So the paintings, the large silkscreen and painted images on canvas is the kind of top end of the products available. But another facet of many artists' work was producing prints. And so what a print is generally it's an image made using one of many methods of reproduction. In other words, the artist will kind of produce the original, whether it be an etching, where the artist, uses a stylus to draw through a layer of shellac on a metal plate, and then it's etched with acid, and it's inked, and then it's run through a press. Or it's a lithograph, where you draw on a stone and do various things to the stone, and then you can ink it up and make prints of it. Or it's a woodcut. So people think of the sort of Japanese woodblock prints of the 18th and 19th century, where again the image is kind of carved out, and then each of the blocks are inked and printed in succession to get these these images. So in other words, it's a kind of one space removed from the handmade products. It's still, of course, an artistic product of whoever is doing it, but it can be reproduced. You can make an edition of it, and so therefore it's kind of a lowest strata in terms of the hierarchy of work, and as a consequence of it being something that you can reproduce, it tends to be a lot cheaper. So it's a way in for people who want to collect art but maybe don't have the money to buy a painting. And so, of course, as I said, this is something that art has been doing since the centuries. I mean, Albrecht Dürer was famous for being a producer of woodcuts. Rembrandt produced a huge body of absolutely brilliant etchings. Hogarth made kind of engraved versions of his paintings and sold them by subscription. It was a way to kind of disseminate art, for on the cheaper end of the scale. And so it's a persistent moneymaker for the artist to do editions of prints. Now, of course, it's not the same as a reproduction. It's not the same as, well, I'm going to take a picture of one of Andy's paintings and then have a copy made, that you can buy and put on your wall as a poster. I mean, these are still unique works of art within the edition, but they're usually done as a very strict edition. So I'm going to produce 250 copies of this etching, and then the plates will be destroyed. There will be no other copies of it. So there is still a limitation. I mean, it's still a work. It's still a unique. It's still a work of art, but it's again once removed. And so even though Warhol blurred the lines between, as I said, original and reproduction, he still also produced prints. So we're going to look at just two of the sets of them. This is actually the box that the prints came in. This the cardboard box. I love the kind of rubber, the kind of brown cardboard box and the rubber stamped labels. But this was the portfolio of Campbell soup cans, and again, this would be a very common aspect of an artist's practice, to produce a body of prints based on, your paintings, whatever your subject would be. If you again go back to Rembrandt, he produced self-portrait paintings, but he also produced self-portrait etchings, and they're of course much easier to obtain one of the etchings than one of the paintings. And the
run is still limited, though, isn't it?
The run is limited, yes. So any legitimate edition of an art of a series of prints will be a limited run. So yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. So yes, this is this is Campbell Soup 2. So Warhol produced 2 portfolios of the soup can images. This is number 2, and you can tell because they're the kind of they're the kind of off the beaten path flavors of
flavor of the month.
Yeah.
Soup of the month.
Whereas the Campbell Soup 1 portfolio would be like tomato, and chicken noodle and such.
These are oyster stew with grade AA butter. Warhol was sugar pill.
But strangely enough, of course, if you search like Warhol soup can or Warhol Marilyn Monroe, much of the time the images that people know of, like the soup cans that people will know about, will be the prints rather than the paintings. Like, again, because there's so many more of these, you can buy these for much cheaper than you can one of the paintings. You're gonna pay $10 million if you want to buy one of the soup can paintings, but you can buy the portfolio. Well, now at auction it's going to be quite expensive. It's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range. I think $500,000 is how much a complete portfolio of the Campbell soup cans goes for. But again, it's a lot more approachable. So it was a way again to get your work out and to allow a broader segment of the art collecting world to be able to buy it. I'm gonna go to the next one.
I just have to mention cheddar cheese soup. Great as a sauce too.
Great as a sauce too.
Look at this one. You have to add milk to make clam chowder. You add whole milk.
I like that. I like the one with the soldiers that says stout-hearted soup.
Is there kind of a yes? Okay. Hot dog bean, tender beans, and little frankfurter slices. These are cursed. These ones, the cursed Campbell soups.
The cursed Campbell soup. So this is the box of the Maryland portfolio, and you go to the next one, and you can see the Maryland prints.
Here we go.
Yeah, and these will be much more familiar to people, than some of the paintings from earlier. Now, of course, these portfolios of prints were produced several years after the originals. So Campbell Soup 2, for instance, I think was 1968, which was 5-6 years after the original paintings. The same with the Marilyn Monroe. I mean, these are much more kind of day glow, later 60s kind of images of Marilyn Monroe. But and again, when you buy these, you get the whole set. I mean, in the case of the Marilyn portfolio, it's 10 prints, and so when you buy the portfolio, you get 10 prints. So
I like how he's still eking out his greatest hits. I appreciate that.
And that you'll see that again and again, and of course his production of print portfolios became an important part of his artistic production in the 80s, which culminated in these absolutely gorgeous, very technically advanced series of prints that we'll get to in the next stream. All right, so before we move on, I wanted to watch just a little film to give you a last look at the life at the factory, and the file it's in videos, and it's called Warhol CBC 1965.
No, I have to get into those videos. Give me 1 second, Deep.
All right.
It's online, isn't it? It's on your drive.
Yeah, it's in the
We've watched them through there. Okay. So, okay, what's it called?
It's called Warhol CBC 1965.
Got it. Hold on. I'm still not quite right after. I reckon the event was a super spreader event. But I haven't been. I've been ill ever since, haven't I? Okay.
Yeah, so no one got the coof at least.
All right. So,
Andy, what do you think about television?
I love television.
You like being on television?
No, I just like to watch soap operas.
The daytime kind,
Yeah, in the morning kind.
morning kind. Does that go back to the time you used to listen? You used to listen to the old radio soap operas?
Oh yeah.
But you don't much like appearing on television yourself,
No.
or painting on television, as you're doing right now.
No.
Well, just for the sake of the audience, you might say that what he's doing is a screen painting of an electric chair, I believe, right?
Yeah.
What made you think of doing electric chair?
I just think they're beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you come to represent pop art more than maybe anybody else. What is pop art anyway? How would you define it?
Oh, could you ask Ivan that?
Yeah, they usually ask me these technical questions, I suppose if you had to make a definition, it would be painting or sculpture that revolved around commercial imagery or industrial images. Signs and symbols from the everyday life, things that you see all the time, repeated interminably, done in a sort of very stylized way. Usually the images themselves don't come from an actual subject. The artist takes the image from somebody else's reproduction, somebody else's depiction of it. Usually a photograph or a movie clipping, something from a magazine usually. That's probably the closest you can get to a general definition, familiar images.
Yeah, well, most of us are aware of what the critics have said about it. One of the things they say is that, well, they say different things, but one of the things they say, Andy, is that this is sort of anti-art or art without feeling or what have you. You get an emotional kick out of seeing these things that you do. I mean, seeing them original. You have that big Elvis Presley thing. Do you like Elvis Presley movies, for example?
Oh yes. Well, just because it's something we do every day. I mean, that's the reason we do it.
Yeah, it's just something we do every day. That's the reason we do it.
what a different. I mean, can you imagine being the reporter sent there? It's just like Jesus.
Yeah, I get a special pleasure out of watching Warhol torture journalists.
Yeah, I mean, I used to think Bob Dylan was the most difficult interview, but I think Warhol's even more kind of difficult because he's just so non-compliant with. He's not giving them anything whatsoever. Can you imagine being like the normie kind of sitting watching that at home? What the hell were they made of it?
The hell was doing that? I also like that particular film because it's very rare to see any films of Warhol doing anything. So it's sort of nice to see him actually involved in the process there. I mean, he was involved in the process most of the time, but it is a rare glimpse of him actually working on a one of the famous sort of series.
I like how he got the Penguin to speak for him there. What's his name?
Ivan Karp, his friend and early promoter of his career.
Yeah, I remember this chap from previous streams. So let's.
Ivan was sort of the person who kind of helped Warhol establish himself as a fine artist. So, all right, let me go to the next slide. So, I want to read a little excerpt. All right, let me find it. I'm sorry. So, in 1966, he was having his sort of next show at Castelli Gallery, which was his sort of at this time his primary art dealer, Leo Castelli, and it was a show called which he called the Silver Pillows. And he says here, I'd used the pillows earlier in a Merce Cunningham dance concert, and they meant something special to me. It was while I was making them that I felt my art career floating away out the window, as if the paintings were just leaving the wall and floating away. And so this is I think a big transitional period for him, because basically around this time, as Paul Morrissey became more influential in the scene, and the shift went from making art to kind of making films, and trying to make more commercial films than they'd done earlier. Warhol announced that he was giving up making art. That he was going to become a film producer, and a sort of media figure, and that he was leaving art behind. And so his quote last show of artwork were what he called silver clouds or silver pillows, and they're basically big metallized mylar balloons filled with helium, and apparently they fiddled with them for months, trying to figure out how to keep them floating kind of in the middle of the room, and they could never quite manage it. They put weights on them and such, but they all tended to kind of clump around, and as there was turbulence in the air in the room, they would sort of move around. But Warhol sort of liked the idea that that these became the embodiment of the silver factory. If you recall, the factory was painted silver, and everything was covered in sort of metal foil and silver paint, and he wore his silver wigs, and you can think of one of the Velvet Underground Nico songs, "I'll Be Your Mirror."
Yeah.
Again, it was sort of like the idea of the mirror, the sort of reflective surface, the narcissistic, kind of deadpan reflection, was the sort of summation of his project of creating himself as a kind of artwork. This blank cipher that when you looked into it, you would see not him but yourself, and what you wanted to see in your projections and your reflections. So this was I would say really a foray into kind of a conceptual sculpture. If you want to go to the next,
I just wanted to mention on a meta note, this notion of retiring, quote unquote, from art to pursue something else. I'm wondering. I'm reminded of David Bowie declaring he's giving up rock and roll. Do you remember when he declared rock and roll a toothless old woman and said Ziggy Stardust is retiring? And then came out with Young Americans.
Not only is it the last show of the tour, but it's the last show that we're ever going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that this trope of the kind of the, I don't know how you call it, the fake retirement, but the the last ever thing is a kind of, I think Prince did it later on as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
When he came
Well,
back
Warhol. Well, again, Warhol kind of pioneered a lot of things, and this was one of them. And of course, people wrote about it because of course he, by this point he was certainly a celebrity in amongst a certain circle of people, and he was canny enough to sort of understand that that the normie media would be interested in him. And here's this weird, fey freak, making pictures of soup cans and Marilyn Monroe. So let's do one of those offbeat stories about him. Like he knew that it was a way to generate media interest. And then of course, the ultimate kind of postmodern media event where you declare that you're giving it up. It's a trope that may have started with Warhol.
I know I keep on going on about pro wrestling, but if there's one trope in pro wrestling that Warhol would have influenced, it is the fake retirement. Because I mean, someone like Terry Funk had a retirement tour in 1983, and he was still he's like in his 70s now, and he was still wrestling a couple of years ago. So that happens a lot. Anyway, let's carry on. Okay, I'll be your mirror.
Yeah, there's Andy in one of the Clydes.
Looks quite fun.
There they are at the gallery. And actually, if anyone had a chance to go to like the Warhol retrospective exhibition that was touring around a few years ago, they will include the silver Clydes, the silver pillows. So and you can sort of bash them around, and again, as the turbulence of the air kind of moves around, they float and flop around the gallery. Some of them will sort of sink as they lose helium, and some will rise to the ceiling, and it's quite a curious idea. Yeah.
Let's carry on. There we go.
And so symbolically, Warhol made a film of himself releasing some of the pillows out into the and watching them float away. And again, that sort of almost poetic little line that I'd read, it was as watching his art career float away.
On a side note, I have always liked I may have said this before. At this point, I've probably said everything before, but I've always loved the idea of the faded balloon. Let's say it's January the 14th, and there's been an office party, and in the corner there's still like the remnant, the one last little withered balloon. Yay! I've always loved that idea, and I think Warhol was tapping into it with this.
Yeah. Well, in a way, also, I mean, as we will come to see, this was the sort of beginning of the end of that era of kind of the fun, almost quasi innocent party atmosphere of the 60s. As I talked about it earlier in the stream, the 60s went from this sort of, as I said, sort of naive, experimentation, and as the 60s wore on, things became increasingly dark and violent, and in a way, I think that this exhibition, this sort of conceptual sculpture, in a way, was also this idea of this sort of dream, this sort of naive dream floating away as well. This deflating and disappearing. Yeah,
I like it.
So if you want to go to the video folder, we have another video.
Right. Let me just get back there.
And it's called Silver Clydes.
Let's have a look. Silver Clouds. Here we go. No sound, I take it, D.
No. I think I don't know if they're signed at the end of it or not. Maybe. Oh, there we go.
Oh my God. You know, I told you I watched American Beauty last night. No.
Oh no. Oh, there you go.
Where's my emotionally manipulative Thomas Newman score? Hey, there we go.
There you go. So there's the Clydes floating away. So as I said, you know, the scene around the factory became a lot more chaotic. And as I said, when you introduce chaos of that sort, and when you know, at this point he was quite well known, the whole scene will be quite well known, then there's also the chance that darker elements are going to appear in the scene. Yeah.
Okay. So at first I thought this was a snapshot from Todd Browning's Freaks, but then I just realized that this guy's just got a strange arm. I don't know if it's just odd. He's just doing something odd with his hand there. But yeah, what's happening here?
This is just the kind of group around Warhol. I mean, it's Taylor Mead and Joe D'Alessandro and Gerard Malenga and Warhol
Who's this character in the middle?
The left.
Right in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know who, offhand. I can't quite see who that is. I don't have the note here.
There's a woman there as well.
Not sure.
I see. Just noticed her. Okay. Yeah.
So this is a woman called Ingrid Superstar, who, depending upon whose account you believe, was picked as basically deliberately as an ugly version of Edie Sedgwick.
Oh no.
Basically, they went to a bar near the factory and they find this woman at the bar and sort of brought her into the scene almost as a way to taunt Edie Sedgwick, who, of course, at this point was no longer a part of it. Yes.
I'm sorry to keep on going on about wrestling, D, but you see so many of the same things, right? There was a wrestler who people may have remembered called the Ultimate Warrior. Do you remember? He used to shake the ropes, and well, WCW, who were the rivals of WWF, hyped up for weeks that the Ultimate, we've got a big surprise coming, and they were dropping all these hints that it's going to be the Ultimate Warrior, but they couldn't get him. They couldn't so they ended up just bringing in this random guy called the Renegade, and he acted like the Ultimate Warrior. He looked like him, but he wasn't him, and it was awful. And I spot Warhol pulling similar tricks here with this this character. Also, in do you know we were talking about Prisoner Cell Block H earlier this week? Prisoner Cell Block H was awful for just changing the actress. Same character, different actress, different color hair. Hold on a second, that was a different person last week. And just
also, it's a Doctor Who thing,
And he's literally doing it here with his former best friend, which is really quite dark. So okay.
I thought you would appreciate that.
I do appreciate it. Yeah, I'd like the kind of. I'm gonna bring a shit version. I'm gonna do that with Mark. I've decided. I'm gonna find a fake, not so obvious. Bring him on, UO. Call him like not so serious or something like that. Okay, let's
God. Oh.
There he is. Yeah.
Andy. So this next image is quite extraordinary. This is, I think this was taken in 1967. And this is, I can't remember who it is. It's another, again, one of the young women who just hung around there. Just goofing around, holding a toy 6-shooter, pointing at Andy's head. But I do think that there's something very dark about this, because it sort of shows the vulnerability and danger that I think that this scene had set up. And as I said, there was almost a naivete to this idea that you could just let anyone come into your space. And you could just kind of watch them and film them and have this scene, and that everything would be all right. That it was all just it's all just a movie. It's all just a party. It's all just a scene.
It's difficult not to think of a manifestation looking at this. That concept that you kind of manifest your own destiny in some strange way.
Yeah, and that's what's so I think haunting about this picture.
Yeah, I'm also reminded though. We've mentioned Bowie a few times. There is that scene in Man Who Fell to Earth, isn't there, where she's pointing the gun at him, and do you remember? Right.
Yep. Before you move on, let me. I want to read a little passage. Before I forget. This is going to give you a little idea about that New York California split. All right, let's see. So in 1966, basically around the time of the Silver Clouds, Warhol and his Miu, including Paul Morrissey, drove from New York to California for a show, for basically an exhibition of the Silver Pillows, Silver Clouds at the Ferris Gallery. And the Ferris Gallery is where Warhol had his first kind of major exhibition at the very start of his fine art career, doing showing the silver Elvis paintings. And so they were going back out there, which he didn't attend. Warhol didn't actually go to that first opening, but this time they actually decided to drive out. So imagine them all piled in a car driving Route 66 to California.
You're just finding it, I take it.
Yeah, I'm finding the section. Paul blamed LSD for the decline of humor in the 60s. He said the only person on LSD who had a sense of humor left was Timothy Leary. In a way, he was right, because when we went up to San Francisco, whenever you tried to have fun with somebody, they would act like, how dare you make a joke? Everybody seemed to be taking the cosmic jokes so seriously, they didn't want you to make little uncosmic jokes. But on the other hand, the kids on acid did seem happy, enjoying all the simple things like hugs and kisses and nature. The San Francisco scene was bands and audiences grooving together, sharing the experience, whereas the Velvet style was to alienate people. They would actually play with their backs to the audience at times. Anyhow, we were out of our element for sure. They call this a light show, Paul said, looking at the stage during the Jefferson Airplanes act, where they had projections from the glass with fluid on it. I'd rather sit and watch a clothes dryer in the laundromat. A lot of friction developed between Bill Graham and us. So Bill Graham was a was a producer in San Francisco who produced a lot of these early rock shows with like Jefferson Airplane and Janis Joplin and Hendrix and all of that. It was just a difference between New York and San Francisco attitudes. What was funny was that Graham's business style was New York, the fast, loud-mouth operator kind of thing. But then what he was saying were San Francisco flower child things. The end came when we were all standing around in the back of the Fillmore watching some local band on stage. Paul was continuing the same type of LSD put-down commentary that he'd been making all day, comments that I could see were really rubbing Graham the wrong way. "Why don't they take heroin?" Paul suggested, pointing to the group on stage. "That's what all the really good musicians take." Graham didn't say anything. He just fumed. Paul knew he was driving him good and crazy, so he kept it up. "You know, I think I'm really all for heroin because if you take care of yourself, it doesn't affect you physically." He took a tangerine out of his pocket and peeled it in one motion, letting the peels fall onto the floor. "With heroin, you never catch a cold. It started in the United States as a cure for the common cold." Paul was saying everything he could think of to offend Bill Graham's San Francisco sensibility, but in the end, it was dropping the tangerine pills on the Fillmore floor, which he had done totally unconsciously, that brought on the showdown. Little things mean a lot. Graham stared down at the peels and he got livid. I don't remember his exact words, but he started yelling things like, "You disgusting germs from New York. Here we are trying to clean up everything, and you come out here with your disgusting minds and whips," things along that line. On the plane home, Paul reflected, "You know, there's a lot to be said against San Francisco and its love children. People are always so boring when they band together. You have to be alone to develop all the idiosyncrasies that make a person interesting. In San Francisco, instead of becoming outcasts like you're supposed to do when you take drugs, they organize communities around it. And then they get pretentious and they call it a religion. And then they get hypocritical and say some drugs are good and other drugs are bad. LA I liked," Paul continued, "because the degenerates there all stay in their separate suburban houses, and that's wonderful because it's so much more modern. People isolated from each other."
Based.
So anyway, yeah. So as I said, Paul Morrissey is like the most over the top right wing person that you could possibly imagine. And so yeah,
he is calling out the inauthentic, atomized individualism of the California crowd.
Yeah, so there's a lot of entertaining material like that if you ever look into Paul Morrissey. So all right, move on.
Who's this character?
Well. All right, let me pull up another. Sorry to be reading so much, but it's actually better just to pull on these excerpts. I didn't know Valerie very well. She was the founder of an organization called SCUM, which is an acronym for Society for Cutting Up Men. She would talk constantly about the complete elimination of the male sex, saying the result would be a, quote, out of sight, groovy, all-female world. She once brought up a script to the factory and gave it to me to read. It was called Up Your Arse. I looked through it briefly, and it was so dirty that I suddenly thought she might be working for the police department and that this was some kind of entrapment. Literally, she was fed posting. In fact, when we'd gone to Cannes with Chelsea Girls the year before, and I'd given that interview to Cahiers de Cinema, it was Valerie Solanas I was referring to when I said, quote, people try to trap us sometimes. A girl called up and offered me a film script, and I thought the title was wonderful, and I'm generally so friendly that I invited her to come over with it, but it was so dirty that I thought she must be a lady cop. I'd gone on to tell the interviewer that we hadn't seen her since, but then after we got back to New York, she started calling the factory, asking for her script back. I'd left it lying around somewhere and I couldn't find it. Somebody must have thrown it out while we were off in Cannes. When I finally admitted to her that it was lost, she started asking me for money. She was staying at the Chelsea Hotel, she said, and she needed the money to pay her rent. One afternoon in September, when she called, we were in the middle of shooting a sequence for I, a Man, which is the name of one of the Warhol films. So I said, why didn't she come over and be in the movie and earn $25 instead of asking for a handout? She came right over and we filmed her in a short scene on a staircase, and she was actually funny. And that was that. The main thing was she only called occasionally after that with those same man-hating scum speeches, but she didn't bother me so much anymore. By now I decided that she wasn't a lady cop after all. I guess enough people must have told me that she'd been around for quite a while and confirmed that she was a bona fide fanatic. So this is Valerie Solanas. As Warhol mentioned there, she'd written a book called The Scum Manifesto, which was a crazed sort of genocidal feminist imagining of a world where men were eliminated. And, you know, as I said, when you have a policy where you open your doors to all manner of people, whether they be the high or the low, and when you encourage eccentric people, at a certain point, you're going to get someone who's beyond eccentric. You're going to get people who are actually troubled. And Valerie Solanas, I would say, was the prime example of that. Do you want to watch a little snip of her in that Warhol film that he mentioned?
Yeah, let's have a look. This should be interesting.
So the file is called.
Okay.
Solanas, I, a Man in 1967.
Yes, got it. Now we're gonna have to be careful. We may have to pause and talk over this at various points because they've been funny, the Warhol estate, have they not? So let's have a look.
Yeah, they don't actually own this one, so I'm not sure. So,
okay.
But yeah, we'll pause.
But this is her here.
Yep.
Horse face, not a monkey face.
Right here. This is
Okay. You get the key?
Let's see. What do I have here?
Somebody get your roommate?
What am I doing up here with a finko like you? You, finko like you.
Well, I thought we'd come in and have, talk, have a smoke, drink.
I can't figure it out. You're a fink.
You don't even know me.
Help me out. What was my motivation? Oh, I remember. Let's start in the elevator when I grabbed your ass. You know, you've got the squishiest male ass I've ever seen. I mean, how do you keep it so squishy? I mean, what do you got, a squishing?
It gets squeezed a lot, yeah. It gets. Can we go inside and we'll talk out in the hall?
No, I like to talk out here. It's cozy. Now, why don't you lean against the wall? You know, you can hide in your wall.
Go into the place.
Why?
What is it? What is your story?
How would you like to be squishy all over?
Can you give me a massage?
I just want to mention that who is the male actor here? Because he's bad. I would just say he is not the greatest actor in the world, this guy.
Well, I would say you don't go to Warhol films looking for great acting talent.
Just
feel it. I mean, what do you think?
Did you ever want to be squishy over here, squishy over here? Huh?
Not really, no. I mean, if you take me inside.
Nathan Hood is saying she's like that woman from Bottom.
Why don't we go in and go into your place? Do you live by yourself?
Why?
I don't want to sit out in the hall. Someone might come in. It's so.
Look, my roommate's in here, and by the way, she's squishier than you.
Well, I'd like to meet her.
Why?
Well, I'd like to meet someone squishier than me.
I'm squishier than you. You met me.
I haven't touched you yet. What do you mean? I haven't laid a
That
finger
doesn't
on
mean
you.
I'm not squishier than you. I'm still squishier than you.
Can we just step inside your place for about?
I told you, my roommate.
Did he write the dialogue? Did
No, I mean it's all. No. It's all. They're just ad libbing, as all these early Warhol films were just ad libbed.
I see.
Anyway, I mean it goes on and on and on like this.
Squishy. Okay.
Squishy. That fellow is called Tom Baker, but he's not that Tom Baker. He's a different Tom Baker.
But the point is that you've got some element of a slightly abrasive character there.
Yes,
A New Yorker, effectively.
yes.
Okay.
So the other thing I want to mention is that during this period, the lease had expired on the factory, the famous silver studio space where this whole scene had cropped up, and they had to move because eventually the building was demolished, and so they'd actually find a loft space in a building in Union Square. Don't go any further than this picture.
Okay. Yeah.
They just recently moved into this loft space in a building in Union Square, totally different neighborhood.
Tragedy. The factory lost.
The what?
I said tragedy. The factory's lost.
Yes, the factory was gone, and I think again, this period was a period of transitions. I think the Silver Pillows, which was one of the last works that he did at the original factory, was kind of symbolic for these transitions, these changes. And the new factory was a very different place. I mean, it was in a much more posh sort of type of building. It was painted entirely white. It was geared towards basically business. They thoroughly shifted gears and were trying to actually produce commercial films at this point, rather than the kind of social scene and art scene that had been so much a part of the 47th Street factory. And so, of course, the tenor of the whole scene changed. So they had recently moved to this new space. It had not been furnished properly, and they were still making this transition. And I'm going to read from Popism. It was a very hot day, and as Jed, Valerie, and I waited for the elevator, I noticed that Valerie was wearing a fleece-lined winter coat and a high turtleneck sweater, and I thought how hot she must be. Although, surprisingly, she wasn't even sweating. She was wearing pants, more like trousers. I'd never seen her in a dress, and she was holding a paper bag and twisting it, bouncing a little on the balls of her feet. And then I saw that there was something even more odd about that day. When you look close, she'd put on eye makeup and lipstick. We got off at the 6th floor and stepped right out into the middle of the studio. Mario Amaya was there, an art critic and teacher who I'd known since the 50s. He was waiting to talk to me about putting on a show somewhere. Fred, and this was Fred Hughes, someone we'll talk about in a moment, was up front at his big desk writing a letter in longhand. Paul Morrissey was across from him at his matching desk talking on the phone. Jed had gone to the back to put in the fluorescent lights. I walked over to Paul. The windows in the front were all open, the doors to the balcony too, but it was still so hot. They were European-style windows, 2 vertical panes in wood frames that opened in and you latched them like shutters. We liked to keep them swinging free, not fastened back by anything, so if there was a breeze, they'd move in and out, back and forth, but there was no breeze. It's Viva, Paul said, standing up and handing me the phone. I sat down in his chair, and he walked to the back. Viva was telling me that she was uptown at Kenneth's salon, where the Midnight Cowboy production people were trying to match her hair color to the boy she was doing the scene with. Both Paul and Fred's desk were actually low metal filing cabinets with big 10-foot by 5-foot boards across them. The working surface was glass, so that when you looked down to write something, you could see yourself. I leaned over the desk to see how I looked. Talking to her was making me think about my own hair. Viva kept gabbing about the movie, about how she was going to play an underground filmmaker at a party scene where John Voight meets Brenda Vaccaro. I motioned for Fred to pick up and continue the conversation for me, and as I was putting the phone down, I heard a loud exploding noise and whirled around. I saw Valerie pointing a gun at me, and I realized she just fired it. I said, no, Valerie, don't do it, and she shot at me again. I dropped down to the floor as if I'd been hit. I didn't know if I actually was or not. I tried to crawl under the desk. She moved in closer and fired again. And then I felt horrible, horrible pain, like a cherry bomb exploding inside of me. As I lay there, I watched blood come through my shirt, and I heard more shooting and yelling. Later, a long time later, they told me that 2 bullets from a .32 caliber gun had gone through my stomach, liver, spleen, esophagus, left lung, and right lung. Then I saw Fred standing over me, and I gasped, "I can't breathe." He kneeled down and tried to give me artificial respiration, but I told him no, that it hurt too much. He got up from the floor and rushed to the phone to call an ambulance and the police. Then suddenly Billy was leaning over me. He hadn't been there during the shooting. He'd just come in. I looked up and I thought he was laughing. And that made me start to laugh too. I can't explain why, but it hurt so much. And I told him, "Don't laugh. Oh, please don't make me laugh." But he wasn't laughing, it turned out. He was crying. It was almost a half hour before the ambulance got there. I just stayed still on the floor, bleeding. And this is actually a crime scene photograph from that shooting. You can see the small square on the floor.
Yeah.
Where
Wow.
one of the shell casings was. So this is actually a police photograph of the studio. And you see, the metal cabinets and all the things he was talking about, and all the kitchen roll on the floor, saturated in blood.
Wow. Okay.
So you want to go to the next image? This is another of the crime scene photograph. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately after I was shot, I learned later that Valerie turned and fired at Mario Amaya, hitting him in the hip. He ran for the back room and slammed the big double doors. Paul had been in the bathroom and hadn't even heard the shots. When he came out, he saw Mario bleeding, holding the door shut. He went to look through the projection room glass and saw Valerie on the other side trying to force the door. When it didn't open, she walked over to my little office on the side. It was closed, so she tried turning the knob. It didn't open either. Jed was holding it shut from the inside, watching the knob going around and around. But she didn't know that. She left it for locked. Then she went to the front again and pointed the gun at Fred, who said, "Please, don't shoot me. Just leave." She seemed confused, undecided whether to shoot him or not. So she went and pushed the button for the elevator. Then she walked back to where he was cornered, down on the floor, and pointed the gun at him again. Right when it looked like she was about to pull the trigger, the elevator doors opened, and Fred said, "There's the elevator, just take it." She did. When Fred called the ambulance for me, they said that if he'd wanted them to sound the emergency siren, it would cost $15 extra. Mario wasn't hurt badly. He was walking around. He actually called for another ambulance for himself. Of course, I was unaware of all this at the time. I didn't know a thing. I was just on the floor bleeding. When the ambulance came, they didn't have a stretcher with them, so they put me in a wheelchair. I thought that the pain I'd felt lying on the floor was the worst you could ever feel, but now that I was in a sitting position, I knew it wasn't. They took me to Columbia Hospital on 19th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues, 5 or 6 blocks away. Suddenly, there were lots of doctors around me, and I heard things like, "Forget it," and "No chance." And then I heard someone saying my name. It was Mario Maya, telling them that I was famous and that I had money. I was in surgery for about 5 hours with Dr. Giuseppe Rossi and 4 other great doctors working on me. They brought me back from the dead, literally, because I'm told at one point I was gone. For days and days afterwards, I wasn't sure if I was back. I felt dead. I kept thinking, I'm really dead. This is what it's like to be dead. You think you're alive, but you're dead. I just think I'm lying here in the hospital. So, you want to go on?
I've never been shot, so I have no idea how it must be awful.
Yeah.
So,
That's
okay.
the last picture of the crime scene picture, looking into the back of the loft where where some of them had gone to hide. So you heard the anecdote about he was talking about Billy coming in and crying, thought he was laughing. That is Billy Name, and that's remember that character who had been at the 47th Street factory that sort of was the unofficial doorman and such, and sort of ran the scene, and he had sort of moved along with them. But again, there's a real sense of degradation with so many things in the 60s, and what had begun as sort of a fun and quirky and seemingly exciting scene, really started to wear people down, and so Billy Name at this period was getting I think really overwhelmed from taking the quantity of amphetamine that he took, and so after a certain point in this new space, he had a room which he used as a dark room to develop photographs, and he started just living in this one room and not coming out during the day. And Warhol actually said that the only way they knew that he was still there was that they would come in the morning and would find like yogurt cups in the bin, like they knew he'd been out at night, to eat and such. But most of the time he was sealed up in this dark room, and he apparently had gotten into esoteric and occult things. He started doing astrology, and he started getting into kind of sort of Crowleyism and such. And so he basically lived as a sort of strange mole person in this space for I think over a year. But again, this slightly before this, that was him, and he did come out and attend to Warhol when he was shot. Let me go to the next picture.
I find it fascinating that Warhol just let this guy just live as a kind of little mole down the end of the corridor. Presumably he didn't play any rent or anything.
No.
Just a bit of just like a gimp, basically. Okay. All right. Yeah, there he is.
And this is Warhol being taken to the ambulance. Yeah, there he is.
In before an Alex Jones watcher says, "It's not really him. Look at the shape of the chin." That always happens now, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it really was him. And he, as you heard, he was severely injured.
Yeah.
All right, we move on.
Warhol fights for his life. I swear I've seen her before somewhere. I think it's just the face,
Yeah, she's unfortunately had a kind of revival, and there's been an attempt to kind of portray her as a pioneer of militant feminism. There's a terrible revision. Well, you remember those women on Twitter who were
Lucy Brown.
Scum. Yeah, that's what she's named that after Valerie Solanas' book. Yeah, a wonderful role model. Yeah. So one last video related to this, if you want to pop back there. And it's called Solanas on Shooting Warhol. So she actually just walked out after the shooting and just walked away. And she that night gave herself up to a policeman in Times Square. She went up to a policeman and handed him the gun and said, I shot Andy Warhol. He had too much control over my life.
Oh, right. Still a man's fault.
Yeah.
In June, pop artist Andy Warhol is shot and critically wounded by a disgruntled would-be actress named Valerie Solanas.
The feminist cries out in pain as she shoots him.
Valerie, why did this happen?
Because he's a
Well, let's clean it up a little. Could you talk to on the air? Why did this happen?
because he's a piece of garbage.
What did he do to you?
Well, let's say, my organization, Scum. He wanted more than anything to control Scum. Yeah, we wanted Scum and we got it.
He may die.
Good.
You mean that?
Yeah, I do.
Why do you hate him so much?
Because he's him.
He gave you a part in one of his movies.
Big deal. I didn't ask for it. He asked me to do it.
What do you think's going to happen to you now?
I have no idea. I don't care. I'm looking forward to going to jail because there's nothing out here but garbage.
Miss Solanas is put in a mental hospital. Mr. Warhol recovers.
Good. So, yeah, she's the great thinker of modern feminism. All right, so my brother's turned up in the chat saying it's part 4 and you're only on the shooting. Jesus.
I know we haven't gotten out of the bloody 60.
Well, we like I said, it's going to take 10 parts, but we'll have to intersperse it with Ever Deepest Laws. Come back in 2 weeks, come back in 3 weeks, etc.
So let me just give one little last bit about the shooting here. Amaya received only minor injuries and was released from the hospital later the same day. Warhol was seriously wounded by the attack and barely survived. Surgeons opened his chest and did manual massage on his heart to help stimulate its movement again. He suffered physical effects for the rest of his life, including being required to wear a surgical corset. As the shooting had a profound effect on Warhol's life and art. Solanas was arrested the day after the assault after turning himself into police. By way of explanation, she said that Warhol had too much control over my life. She was subsequently diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and eventually sentenced to 3 years under the control of the Department of Corrections. So she served 3 years for shooting 2 people, and she was released.
She got off lightly, I would say.
Yeah,
very lightly.
Right. After the shooting, the factory scene heavily increased security, and for many, the factory 1960s had ended. And I want to read a quote, which I think is very, very telling and very candid. I mean, we talked about Warhol, playing these games with journalists. So this was actually a quote to a reporter from the Village Voice, somewhat after the shooting. Before I was shot, I always believed that I was watching TV instead of living life. Right when I was being shot, I knew I was watching television. Since I was shot, everything is such a dream to me. I don't know whether or not I'm really alive, whether I died. It's sad. Life is a dream. I wasn't afraid before, and having died once, I shouldn't feel fear. But I'm afraid. I don't understand why. I'm afraid of God alone, and I wasn't before.
Right. So this wasn't just a transition in terms of moving from the factory to elsewhere, but also could you say this had a lasting, almost spiritual effect on him, coming close to death in this way? Yeah.
Yes, and this is I mentioned the idea that there is a strange arc in Warhol's career. I mean, for the people that have of course perhaps rightly complained about the degeneracy and callousness and all those aspects of him, well, there is an arc that I think most people don't know about. Most people are only familiar with the work that we've looked at with the 1960s Warhol. But as we will see, this completely changed the way he went about his life, the way he went about his art. And increasingly towards the end of his life, I think you'll see these things really crop up. But yes, basically the kind of flippant vampiric automaton, that persona that he had developed, was shattered when those bullets went through his body, and he was never really the same.
So
It took him
that's
many
insane,
months to recover. I mean, he was in hospital, I think, for several months, and then basically couldn't do anything for many months after that. Basically, just convalescence. If you want to go on. Another character that we need to remember is that you recall his mother lived with him. She lived in his building. She had her own sort of suite on the ground floor of his townhouse. And so she was still sort of taking care of him at this point. This is Viva, one of the Warhol sort of superstar people. She'd gone up to Warhol's house and gotten Warhol's mother and brought her to the hospital the night of the shooting. And basically Warhol's mother spent the next few months while Warhol was recovering, basically praying, because she was, as we said, a devout Eastern Rite Catholic. And she basically spent all her time praying for the recovery of her son. And someone answered those prayers. But again, it is so odd to think about, while all this was happening, Warhol was still going home every night to his mother.
Yeah. My gosh. So there she is. I tell you what it is. I actually knew someone in real life who looked quite a lot like this woman.
Oh God!
It's actually uncanny, but I mean, she was lovely, and unlike this,
unlike this
a psycho,
monster. Yeah, I mean, again, you just have to look into her eyes, and you can tell she's completely insane. All right. And this is actually a photograph that Warhol took of himself while he was in hospital. And I've included some images so people can get a sense of what this did to his body. So that's the surgical corset, and he had to wear those for the rest of his life, basically to keep his gut from his guts from filling out.
Oh dear, oh dear.
And
gosh, he did a number on him.
Yeah, those are the scars from all the surgeries that saved his life.
She was scum.
Yeah. This is a photograph by Richard Avedon, a famous photographer. He photographed Warhol, notably this photograph of Warhol's scars, and also members of the Warhol community after this.
Okay.
And so, as I said, he spent quite a long time sort of convalescing, watching television and keeping up. And it's, of course, he was, by this point, the factory was a going concern. It was a business. And so all the people, Paul Morrissey, Frederick Hughes, Jed Johnson, all of these people who had kind of come with him from the transition, they were all still working and running Warhol's business, which, as I said, was at the time trying to promote, trying to make commercial films, and also to promote and produce a magazine, which we'll talk about in a moment. So Warhol kept up with the office, but again, by this point, his enterprise really was an enterprise. It really was a business, and it continued without his presence.
Okay. My brother's saying, I do wonder how much of that girdle was worn purely from paranoia and image. And
I don't know if it was so much image, because I mean, it's not like those photographs of him showing off his scars are very rare. You know, it isn't as if he showed it. He went and took off his shirt for everyone that came along and showed them the scars. So most people had no idea that he was wearing this. But I do think that your brother's right in the sense that he certainly gave him a sense of security. You know, but apparently some of the surgical scars for years would occasionally reopen, and he would have to have them closed again. So I do think there was some physical need for the corset.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time here.
I thought we had 3 hours. I thought we had 3 hours.
I mean, like I say, we are. It doesn't matter if we take 10 parts, though. So we're gonna have to, you know, get to image 60 or whatever, and we'll. Just takes too long. Just takes. Yeah. Yeah. So what are we looking at here?
So these are Richard Avedon photographs of the factory. Now this is again the post-shooting factory. So these are the kind of generation of people. So next to Warhol is Joe D'Alessandro, who was basically a male hustler turned actor, who was in a lot of the kind of films that were increasingly produced by Paul Morrissey. To the left of Joe D'Alessandro is a woman called Bridget Berlin. She went by the name Bridget Polk. We saw her before. She's actually in Chelsea Girls. There's a whole scene of her injecting herself with amphetamine. But she was actually the daughter of I can't remember her father's name, the Berlin family, but he was the CEO of the Hearst Corporation, as in William Randolph Hearst, the newspaperman. And so she was actually an heiress. But you know, again, sort of part of this whole scene, and you know, living this I would say quite extreme and low and degenerate life in the 1960s. She is actually, I would say, if anyone was Warhol's friend throughout his entire life, it was her. I mean, she was with him until his death in one capacity or the other. I mean, they talked on the telephone all the time. She worked as a kind of receptionist at the factory for years and years and years and years. In the 80s, she actually came into her inheritance, and so she was quite well off. And of course, the amphetamines, you know, she was off the drugs, but she was quite an eccentric person in her own right. And she actually died just a couple of years ago at a quite old age. She was another one of these characters who was explicitly right wing throughout all of her life, and you know, when she was old, her favorite things to do were to watch Fox News and listen to Rush Limbaugh. So, as I said, I mean, there's a weird kind of conservative right-wing reactionary spirit among a lot of the Warhol people.
Just to be clear, Dee, are we talking about this woman here or this woman here, the one who's kind of leaning over?
The one in the very center of the photograph, the sort of stout woman with her breast out. Yes.
Why isn't she wearing a bra?
Because she frequently just had her tits out. In fact, she used to make prints of her tits. She would ink them up and press them onto paper. A very, very interesting character.
One thing to mention about this photo. This chap here reminds me of Trainspotting, and whenever we've seen him, he has been like this, kind of all like hunched up and clutching his body and so on. What's the deal with this character?
So his name is Taylor Mead, and he was a poet and basically an underground film star. He was involved in this entire scene kind of beat poetry and kind of, you know, experimental film and experimental theater in New York in the 1960s. And I mean, he sort of knew everyone and was sort of, you know, again, part of a lot of these different you know, these different groups. And he actually lived to a very, very old age as well. He died only a few years ago.
I have extremely dark notions that you know, because you said she always has her tits out, and he's looking quite kind of. Do you remember that? Do you remember that Little Britain sketch? You know, Bitty. I just like, did that happen? What the, like, was she like a mother figure to some of these characters?
I certainly wouldn't call Bridget Berlin a mother figure. No. She was not a mother figure.
Now, I noticed, by the way, that this character, even though this is like a, you know, factory version 2.0 or even 3.0, with like, in terms of his crew, this dude's still hanging around though. He's an ever present, this guy.
Yeah, well, that's Gerard Malanga, who was Warhol's painting assistant throughout the entire 1960s. Gerard left the Warhol basically to, I think he went to Europe to pursue his own career as a poet, and he was involved with an Italian, beautiful Italian model called, I can't remember her name at the time. So he was very soon to leave the scene, but he had been Warhol's primary art assistant throughout the entire 1960s.
Yeah, he's been ever present, basically. He's been like a stalwart of the superstars.
Yeah, yes. I mean, he and Bridget Berlin, the only two in this photograph who had been around since the beginning of Warhol's kind of art career. And Gerard Malanga is still alive, and when you watch any Warhol documentary, Gerard will always be there. So the woman next to him is this woman called Viva, who was again a sort of second generation Warhol superstar, you know, and then behind her, lurking in the background, that's Paul Morrissey.
I see.
The chap who was sort of really directing the scene and who ended up becoming the kind of filmmaker. After this period, Warhol was not responsible for any of the films. They were basically Paul Morrissey films. Warhol became the kind of producer, but he no longer was there with the camera. That period had passed.
No, I guess we might as well. Who's this character here on the just standing right to the left of Warhol?
That's Joe D'Alessandro, who I said was basically a male hustler who had, became an actor and was in a number of the Paul Morrissey era Warhol films.
I see. Okay.
And you want to go to the next image? It's a continuation.
Right.
So there's Avedon did a number of these huge panoramic pictures of them. So that's Joe again. D'Alessandro lying naked on the bed, and that female looking character is Candy Darling, who was a transsexual who was involved in, again, these films, who died of cancer in the early 1970s. So
pretty good by the standards of 2021.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, well, as Warhol said, I mean, she was really one of the few of the trannies in his scene who really looked good and who really passed as a woman. She's really the only one. And she's in a number of the productions, but again, she had this sort of dream of becoming a kind of old style Hollywood star, but she never really got a chance. Although, speaking of Tennessee Williams, he cast her in a part in one of his plays. I think the play was called Small Craft Warnings. And so Tennessee Williams actually put Candy Darling in the play in a small part.
Wow, okay. It's kind of interesting though, because all of Tennessee Williams' female characters are kind of ciphers for him, which is
Yep.
Kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. But there could you put your tits away, look. Come on. What is
Never.
this?
No. All like half the pictures of Bridget Berlin, she's got a tit side. So that's Bridget there. That's Bridget there on the left, and that's Candy Darling next to her in the back, and Warhol there, and then the woman on the right is a French woman called who's Isabelle Dufresne, I think was her real name, but she was called Ultraviolet, and she was a well-to-do European woman who basically had come, again, very much like Jane Holzer, to just be a kind of part of the Warhol scene as a way to kind of spice up her life. And so
can I just say, I'm picking up, how can I say this, Falstaff in Henry IV Part 2 vibes from this. Now, if you understand this reference,
yeah,
in Henry IV Part 1, Falstaff is just having a whale of a time. He's hanging out with the prince, you know, he's hanging out with Hal. They're kicking it up, they're laughing, it's great. In Part 2, he's still kind of going to taverns and hanging around, but now he's hanging out with like Justice Shallow and Justice Silence and all these kind of characters. And this, when he gives his kind of "we have heard the chimes at midnight" speech, and it's like
chimes at midnight.
It's not as fun as it used to be, and it's almost like he's trapped in this endless cycle of kind of, you know, like the joke isn't funny anymore. And I'm getting these slightly sad vibes here, where it's like the scene is a bit sadder than the
yes, and it all went away very quickly. Unfortunately, I don't know that we'll get to that in the 70s, but yes, I mean, this era passed away quite quickly. And I think Warhol, you know, in fact, Billy Name, the man who ended up living in the closet, said that basically Warhol, before he was shot, was Warhol, and after he was shot, he became Plastic Andy. And a number of people who knew him before the shooting and after have said something to that effect, that again, that he really changed as a person, that he really became a much different character. And of course, you know, I think really withdrew into himself in a certain way. He was really guarded. I mean, I don't think he ever really trusted people after the shooting again. I mean, so you certainly don't blame him, you know, because when you've gone through that. But you know, I think that the nature of his character really changed, and I do think that's very astute of you, kind of picking that vibe up. That almost, you know, that this was it was kind of over, and it really was over, and not just in the Warhol scene, but I think in the larger sense. By 1968, 1969, the 60s were clearly burning themselves out, and a lot of all the idealism, I think, drained away by that point, and things just became violent and ugly and desolate. And you know, and of course we saw the degradation that came in the 1970s. You know, we'll go to the next. I want to get us out of the 60s. Again, this is the post, you know, shooting crowd. Paul Morrissey there. That's Holly Woodlawn, who's another transvestite.
No, I don't want to get us too far off track, but do you know if you've ever seen that meme of like the death of a club or whatever, the death of a hobby? I've noticed an influx of women, which usually happens before the end of it.
Before the end. Well, you say that, but only one or two of the people we've seen are actually, you know, biological women. So there's only one biological woman in this photograph, by the way, and that's the one on the right. Jane Forth was.
What's she done to her eyebrows? Bloody hell!
Oh, I don't know. You know.
Okay. And
Joe D'Alessandro and Jackie Curtis, the one that has the Andy tattoo on her arm.
We've heard the chimes at midnight, Master Shallow.
Yes.
Oh, okay. What's going on here?
This is actually a scene from one of the Paul Morrissey, one of the first sort of Paul Morrissey led films, called My Hustler. But you may know the left half of this still as the cover of the Smiths' first album.
Yes, I do. Yes, I thought I recognized that. Yeah.
Yes.
Very interesting.
So yes, this still from a Warhol film was the cover of the Smiths' first record.
That by the way, that's a deeper story we need to do as well. Maybe maybe as a break from Warhol for 1 week we'll do just the story of Smith's front covers, because I think that would be a fascinating screen for people. Yeah.
Someone in the chat looks like a Smiths album cover. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, and Smith singles as well, because they don't forget they had singles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amazing covers on all those.
I'm kind of reminded a little bit of Joe Orton, if you're familiar with any of his works.
Yes, a very subversive character.
Yeah.
Who met an equally sad fate.
Yeah, tragic. I used to give a lecture on entertaining Mr. Sloan,
yes.
which I always insisted on slipping into various courses. Okay, Andy, I am not here anymore, but I am fine. Love, Billy.
Yeah, so one day in I think 1970, they all came into the office, and there was a horrible smell, and the door to the back room was open, and it was filled with just filth, like 10,000 fag ends and rubbish and astrology charts, and there was this note which was actually just a page torn from a catalog, pinned to the desk, and Billy the Mole Man was gone, and he never returned to the scene. So that was I think
for you. I'd just let you live as a mole on the end of the corridor for a while. Yeah, I'm gone now. Bye then.
Yeah, I'm not here anymore, but I'm fine. So, actually, Billy, again, I think Billy had just completely burnt himself out on amphetamines and drugs. And he ended up hitchhiking to California and spent several years picking fruits and nuts. And, most of the rest of the 70s kind of recovering from the mental and physical trial that he'd put himself through. Billy Name actually lived quite a long time. I think he died in like 2014 maybe. So some of these characters who you would never have thought survived actually survived for quite a long time. But yes,
the men seem to be doing better than the women.
Billy left the scene, never to return, and so it really was the kind of changing of the guard.
I was taken a little bit aback by this one.
Yeah. And so this of course brings up a huge part of the Warhol story, which is Interview magazine. And this is actually the cover of the first edition of Interview magazine. So Warhol, as I said, he had this extreme entrepreneurial spirit, and again, so much of that idea of do it yourself. Well, I want to be a famous artist, so I'm going to become one. I want to be a filmmaker. Okay, so I'm just going to start making films. I want to be a film producer. I want to be in the music business, so I'm going to latch onto the Velvet Underground and produce their record and promote them. I want to be an author, so which he did. He published a novel in the late 1960s, which was a transcription of tapes he made of one of his amphetamine friends. And he wanted to be a publisher. He wanted to have a magazine, and so they started one, and it was called Interview. And originally, the premise is that they would just, get people involved in film and entertainment and whatever, and just tape candid interviews, and then transcribe the interviews, exactly as they were on the tape, and that would be the magazine. And so it started as a very shoestring operation. There's a very funny story on YouTube told by Bob Colacello, who was one of the Warhol associates who came in at this time. about producing the first issue of Interview magazine. So anyone look that up on YouTube. But Interview actually became a major part of Warhol's business empire, and of course he continued to produce it, the magazine, right up to his death, and it continued afterwards. In fact, I think it only ceased publication a couple of years ago, a victim, like almost every other magazine, a victim of the internet age. But Interview became a very successful and influential magazine. And this is Frederick Hughes, who basically became Warhol's business manager. And so the Paul Morrissey era, extended a few years into the 1970s. And of course, Warhol became a film producer as well. So Paul Morrissey got funding and went off to Rome, to Cinecittà, to produce films under the banner, under the Andy Warhol production. So he produced a film called Andy Warhol's Dracula with Udo Kier, and a film called Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, and they were actually commercially released. Sort of low mid-budget, sort of in the style of Hammer horror of the time. But again, produced under the auspices of Andy Warhol Enterprises. But Paul Morrissey's influence over the factory sort of faded quite quickly. But Fred Hughes sort of took over as the kind of real manager of the Warhol enterprise, especially Warhol's kind of art related business career, and stayed with him till the end. In fact, Frederick Hughes became the executor of Warhol's estate. So he really was sort of the kind of the tenor of the Warhol scene really changed as Fred Hughes and various other people at this period took over, and it became much more an obvious business.
I mean, I was about to say, we were looking at those chimes, we've heard the chimes at midnight, but they just look grown up now. It's like they're adults all of a sudden.
Yeah, isn't it strange? It's yeah. Well, so if you let me see. Hang on, let me see. It's a yeah. Okay, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't have that in there, but later on you'll see that. You go to the next slide. So it is weirdly like they all just grew up. Warhol's look also changed in the 1970s. So basically, he went from wearing, the sort of striped shirt with turtlenecks and leather jackets to wearing tweed, jackets and tie. And so every picture of Warhol in the 70s, he's wearing a tie and a jacket. It is oddly like they all just sort of grew up and started to be serious.
There's even a bit of Donald Trump in there, Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And this is 1971, and so Warhol had the first kind of major retrospective exhibition of his art career. This was at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York.
It's living off his greatest hits, Steve. Living off his greatest hits.
Well, I mean, this is what happens with an artist. I mean, once you really pass into, once you become a really established figure, as Warhol was by this point, his career was 10 years old. And you get these retrospective exhibitions, and they start to cement your place in the history of art, and as we'll see, that Warhol really struggled to make the transition, because what happens with artists, in any scene. So if you take the abstract expressionists or the pop artists or something, there will be the big stars, there will be the big breakout stars. And then there will be the kind of other artists who were working in this style, who were part of the scene, but who really won't ever go past that. So that, and this is always the case in every movement, and this goes back hundreds of years into the history of art. You know, there will always be people who were part of a kind of style or movement, but who never make the transition out of it to become a kind of bigger artist. You know, they'll always be an abstract expressionist from that one period of time, and they don't really ever progress. And so I think became
associated with the 60s and nothing else, is what you say. He didn't have like
I'm not saying that, but I do think that there was that there was an intentional struggle to kind of figure out where to go, and I think a real understanding that he didn't want to become a relic of the 60s. He didn't want that to be his time, and then once that was over, he was just a figure of the past. I mean, he was still relatively young, and that there was a sense, how do I move on? How do I take these aspects of my artwork and kind of carry that in a new direction that is going to kind of be something else? And that's something that every artist struggles with. I mean, you become well known for a body of work. Every artist will have a kind of breakthrough exhibition, whatever your style is, whatever your style at the moment, whatever your innovation will be. And then you have to figure out, do you want to be a one-trick pony, or do you want to figure out how to transform yourself and become something important beyond that one thing? And every artist goes through it. Like Picasso, for instance. I mean, he could have, languished in, the blue and rose period. He could have languished as a cubist, but I think truly talented artists will find a way to sort of reinvigorate their work and reinvent themselves and continue to do things that that people are going to want to look at and engage with.
Well, I mean, I always, when it comes to this thing, I always think it's so I'm trying to think of like people who get stuck. I mean, John Osborne would be someone I would say who very much struggled to overcome like the angry young man label and the kind of that moment, of the late 50s, early 60s. And so he's just known for just that. When I was looking at the Bob Dylan, when I was doing my Bob Dylan stream, one of the reasons I think Dylan is a great artist is because he has early, middle, mature, late period. W.B. Yeats would be another person I'd say who has many different phases of his career. I often think that, I mean, you mentioned Picasso has very obvious phases in his career, So this is what do you think Warhol would have been thinking about that around this time?
Oh, absolutely. He would have been thinking about that. Yes. I mean, and again, because it's the occasion of a retrospective. So in a way, a retrospective is both a blessing and a curse. I mean, you have this big exhibition of all the work you've done, all your greatest hits. And so does it become an epitaph, or does it become an opportunity to then move on and produce, to further extend yourself into new territory? So the big early mid-career retrospective, as I said, it can be a good thing or it can be a terrible thing. That could be the end, that could be the final chapter, So it's certainly a crossroads, and I think he was certainly well aware of that. Again, this is him at the retrospective with Ultraviolet and Candy Darling. The entire show was hung on the cow wallpaper, as you see back there.
Yes. I'm wondering what's a good cleavage point be to pick up for next time. I'm wondering if This we might
This
have
is
to do like
probably a good point to stop. Yeah.
because I feel like we're about to move into 70s work. and-
Yes, we are about to move into the 70s, where I think this is the perfect place to stop. Of course, I had planned to get to the end of the 70s.
yeah, but ambitious, D, ambitious.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot. There's a lot to talk about, and as we've noted, it's not just about Warhol. I mean, it really is about this whole period of time, and there's so many offshoots and so many kind of people who were adjacent to this scene that you can kind of tell their story through the story of Andy Warhol. So, and I think we're being quite detailed, and it's going to take time to tell that story. So,
yeah, all right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, D. I have scheduled next part for next week. So, I mean, as things stand, I think we'll keep it like that. But
okay, I got to do it. I get the chance to do lots of nice thumbnails. So I hope people.
Yeah, you can replace the. I just put a placeholder in for that cover.
Oh
so
yeah,
you can
I
replace
saw.
it,
Yeah, Andy and Archie. Yeah.
There are some super chats though. I've just realised I forgot about them. Here's the Eunuch said Warhol's quote about fear and feeling untethered from reality is a perfect example of what I said on the Kuma Truth Regime stream about God becoming self. Nihilism is the darkness that chaos inflicts on the human soul. We need divine order. So there we go. I don't remember Years being so God Squad. She's obviously found some truth there.
Okay.
Here's the Eunuch says the year is 2025. First, it was a unique artist. Then it was we need to be thorough. Now we're on stream 95 of 2 streams to show the Warhol. I am AA's last subscriber. This is my story.
Amazing.
2 weeks. 2 weeks to flatten the Warhol.
2 weeks to flatten the wall. I mean, if you recall, it took us 30 minutes to get past image 1. So,
I mean, I did Dylan in 2 shows. Well, I mean, I still got a bit to finish, but you
didn't go into the with this granularity though.
No, I didn't. No, I took a broad brush.
Yeah,
I was an impressionist. This is like different.
It's also difficult when you're doing streams about musicians, none of whose work you can actually play. I mean, it does. I can show the Warhol paintings, but I mean, you can't really do that with music. So.
Well, I did for one of them, and then got hit with 82 different copyright claims.
He did, yes.
C123 says, spared by these, I recently went to my local museum, saw the pop art they had from Warhol and others. My favorite was Thiebaud's Jawbreaker Machine.
Yes, Wayne Thiebaud. Amazing painter from this. Yeah, amazing painter from this period, and still alive. I believe he's like 101 or something. And still working, as far as I know. Yeah, wonderful. I love
Wayne. Jawbreaker Machine.
I love Wayne Thiebaud's work. Yeah.
There it is. There you go. So I'll continue. C123 says thoughts on Thomas Cooter. D seems pretty based.
Thomas Cooter.
Thomas Cooter.
How do you spell the surname?
Couture. French painter from the 19th century, by the looks of things.
Oh, yeah, I'm afraid. Yeah, is he any academic? And that sort of academic painter. It's not really my repertoire. If it's a sort of post-impressionist or symbolist.
He did Romans in their decadence, for example.
Yeah, so it sounds a bit like French academic painting. So I it's not my area of expertise. No.
See it on the screen here.
Yeah.
1847.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Next, Craig H says, wondering if there will be more art streams in the future and who will be next, if so. So, well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what comes down the pike. I do know there's a kind of, because we've been taking quite a long time on these. There's a whole like backlog of various different ideas that are floating around at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, Farrah sent me a massive list of them a while back. So
yeah, Ferrum was champing at the bit there. Well, we also sort of mentioned the idea that, you know, with Warhol, we're kind of diving in at the postmodern deep end, you know, and I think it would be nice at some point to sort of have maybe a sort of broader sweep of kind of basic art historical information that might help people to sort of contextualize things. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would also like to do some literary canon. So I'm wondering if we could like do a thing where we look at an era over this course of a month. You know, the art, the literature, but that would require some planning between us all. But we can think about that just to get grounded in various areas. Craig H says, wondering if there will be more art. Retina says, dear Mr. AA, I hope the afternoon, Dr. AA to you, thank you very much. Your afternoon has been going well. Keep up the good work, my friend. Well, thank you very much. Means so much. Benjamin Root says, just want to say that even though D and I really don't agree on this stuff, he was brilliant on unpopular opinions on the Coof, as was the Pastor Ozzy. This has been a pretty big week for content on this channel, because we did this is the third stream we're doing this week, D. Look at us.
I was talking to Hat and others this morning, and they sort of reminded me that I have now done, let's see, 4, 8. I have streamed for 11 hours on your channel this week, eh?
I know. It's pretty.
So and you still have a cigar stream ahead of you, so.
Yeah, and I meant to be on Scrump and Evelyn's show tonight. So
dear. Are you talking about the SFO question or something?
No, we're talking about the Boomer Truth regime.
Okay.
And sketching out the concept and explaining all about it. So I mean, if people are new to this channel, maybe you've come through the V. Quite a lot of people subscribed after V's video, believe it or not. If you've come through that route, try to catch that show later on, because it's a pretty fundamental concept, the Boomer Truth regime that we talk about on this channel. Jedi Knight Anakin Cringe Walker says, I'm told I'm a discount NSO. Cringe Walker, while this was going on, I made a bit of a tweet. I'll just share it with you. Inspired by Andy Warhol, I want to create a fake mark. Please apply below. And I've also put it out on Telegram. So I'm gonna be auditioning for fake Mark, and I'm literally gonna stick him in at instead of Mark on various weeks. See if I can replace him like the Renegade in wrestling.
What about the real Mark?
I just want to phase him out. Bring in the fake.
I love you, Mark.
And then Sam Petra says, D, I think you mentioned that you care little for critical literature. Would you ever deign to touch Tom Wolfe's The Painted World, or is it too plebeian?
Hang on a second. I've got. Hang on. I'll be right back. Can you read another one?
That's it. Oh well. Diesta. I think somebody's got to the door or something. I'll just have a read to see what people have been saying.
I've got a delivery. Hang on. I'll be right back.
Which channel is it on? I'll be listening to that. Let me see if there's a link I can get off Evelyn. Do you have a link to the stream that I can share? Yeah. Maybe it's because I've been talking too much. My voice never gets any better. My brother saying the rent boy arrived. Naughty. The trouble is with making Cringe Walker the fake NSO is that he's American, so he's got the wrong. But maybe that will be funny. Maybe. Well, Time Stealer is already a personality in his own right, so it has to really be a blank kind of. It just needs to be just be like a fake mark. So there we go. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's maybe on Scrump's channel. Yeah, exactly. Yes, it needs to be a nobody that I can just throw in. You know, if you want to know what I'm talking about, just like Warhol replaced. Yeah, so. I'll share my image here while waiting for these to come back. You see here the real Ultimate Warrior like this. So this was the actual Ultimate Warrior, if people remember. And on WCW, there was the Renegade, who looked like it was just a fake. And I want to make my very own Renegade. They even made him like the TV champ or something at one point. And he has an awful match with Arn Anderson. Tried to carry him to something decent, but he was an awful wrestler, bless him. There he is, look, with Jimmy Hart. So yeah, tragic figure. So that'll be my. I want to create my very own Renegade. So I just need somebody who's got just a reasonably plain English accent and kind of Morrowind NPC looks, and I can just bring him in as not so. Yeah, there we go. I don't know where D's gone for his delivery. It's obviously like got a massive drive or something. Oh well. Just read more. I could never be a fake mark. Someone said as a Welshman, I couldn't go that low. I need to get a fake mark in. Somebody out there will be able. I'll find someone. Maybe it will have to be Cringe Walker. Bringing Cringe Walker as not as a fake mark. Right, let's see what else. I think it's on Scrump's channel.
Hello.
Okay, you're back.
Sorry about that. I had to take delivery of some things. So, not a fucking rent boy. Tell your brother to shut up. I keep them chained in the basement.
Yeah, I think it is on Scrump's
so I
channel,
saw
yeah.
the super chat, the painted word. I've not read the painted word, although I have read some Tom Wolfe. I read his sort of humorous book about criticizing modern architecture, which is a hilarious read called "From Bauhaus to Our House." So yes, I've certainly read Wolfe. He's wonderful.
What about Alexander Adams? Is he a good read? I've enjoyed him on other topics.
Yeah, Alexander's great. Highly recommended. Maybe doing a stream with him and the evil Pharaoh about the decadent movement of the late 19th century. So
yeah, well, we had a good stream last week, didn't we? About various things. That was a good panel. All right, folks. Well, I am like as I say, I'll be back later if my voice can withstand it for Scrump, and then tomorrow I'm back with Cigar Stream with Keith Woods. We're looking at the Chinese social credit system, and then I'm probably going to die because this is the most stuff I've ever done in a week. It's pretty hardcore.
It's punishing. It's quite punishing.
Yeah, but I'm going on holiday soon, so I may be away for a while. So I'm kind of front loading it. As I say, if you're going back to school, good time to pick up Trivium or Foundations of Research, or if you're doing econ, Foundations of Economics, because you'll learn, if you are doing econ, you'll learn a lot more on my course than you will. It'll be like week 2. Now we're going to do fancy graphs and and then yes. Anything that you would like to promote, D, before we get out of here?
No. Just I assume maybe we'll be back next week with Warhol part. What is it? 18? I don't know.
Yeah, well, we're going to do Warhol. Actually, no.
Oh,
not next week. Sorry, not next week. I'm away next week.
okay.
Yeah. Unpopular Opinions is on, but Deepest Law is off. And well, we can talk about that another time, because I was thinking, well, because the following Tuesday I'm off as well, and I was toying with giving you the keys to the stream yards just to do a show without me.
Everything that has happened has been according to my design.
Yeah, I mean, you guys could do if I do that, you guys could do a Deepest Law next week without me. And I'm away for Cigar Stream as well, so
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, at least you'll get some rest. When are you going to the lodge? When's the first lodge?
Well, they have to move out. They have to. The people there need to, to go.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, soon. But nobody can say I haven't put in some shifts. Come on. All right, get out, everybody. Bye.